So my questions are really genuine because I'm thirsty for anything that would inspire me and is more than eating, drinking, and creating babies on this planet. And now with the oceans depleted and ruined and the coral reef dying, you're doing something that I wonder how it will affect or be beneficial to a regular public. Or you don't care about it?
No, I do.
Yeah,
well, I care deeply.
no,
One of the things that
much.
interested me in this, when we started, before I started this project, I was interested in underwater sound, and I made some radio programs with marine biologists, scientists, and one in particular, Chris Clark from Cornell, and he was telling me about noise pollution in the oceans, and I made a radio program for BBC Radio called The Problem with Noise, where we looked at noise pollution on land and a recent World Health Authority report about it and about the psychological, medical effects of noise pollution. And I was also interested in speaking to Chris Clark about it, who's looked a lot and listened a lot underwater, and he horrified me by saying, there's more noise pollution out there in the largest habitat on the planet than there is on the land. And he gave me several examples, and I thought, as I started work on this project, one of the purposes would be to inform people through the artistic representation of some of the science, and so not only let them engage with the beauty of underwater sounds and the complexity and interest of the animals, but also the fact that we're filling up the underwater with so much noise pollution and the damage that's causing. And so that informs another part of the project, which I was talking about, people's perhaps, creating a system where people can better understand what scientists are doing through the interpretation of our work. And so that interests me, and that I think is really worthwhile. And that's another element of it.
But what makes it art? That's what I'm questioning. I totally agree and think it's very useful what you're doing. But the art installation to me is something which is done by people that are going to this kind of exhibits, but 99% of the public that would desperately need to be informed is not going there, has no way to connect to that.
I think they do these days. It's not 99% of the public don't go to galleries. There's an increasing audience, and also a lot of our work.
That's a statistic I read that not just installation but modern art is now, if you take the gallery owners and the people that make a living out of art away, it's like 99% of the audience does not connect with.
A lot of the places we work, or I work in Jana works as well, aren't, and that's the other thing that sound does. It's taking it back to the concert hall and performance spaces, because of what we were talking about earlier. The presentation is key to it. In a lot of galleries, sound that's been put into galleries has been badly presented. It's a big turn-off. And there's a larger argument about contemporary art, which is fine. There's also an argument about traditional art. I mean, I was commissioned 2 years ago to go into the National Gallery in London. This is a gallery that stopped collecting art in the middle of the 19th century, and they have 4,000 paintings on display. And they asked me, they said, how long do you think anybody spends in front of one of these paintings, whether it's a Monet, Manet, a Constable or a Turner, any of these paintings? 4,000 paintings, all the beautiful Italian Renaissance paintings. The average time anybody who goes in there spends in front of a painting is 4 seconds. 4 seconds. And so they were thinking of ways of improving or getting people to stay longer. So I was commissioned with some other people they said, pick a painting and make a soundtrack to it, which is exactly what I did. I chose Constable's The Cornfield because I'm very interested in perspective in sound, and I could see perspective in the painting. And to a certain degree it worked. There were people who would either with headphones. I also did a live piece in front of the painting, where I talked about the sound that I could hear in the painting. So, and it got people in. It got on the evenings. There was more people came and sat and listened to it, and perhaps it's on the website, thought a bit more about the painting.
It's the influence of cinema, where we have image and sound connected.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of my work is cinematic, because that's where I learned the craft, if you like. I worked in television and I worked in sound post-production, so I worked on creating sound for films, and so a lot of my work is linear based like that. It's not abstract, it's not conceptual in that sense, it has a linear base to it. A lot of my recordings are elapsed time, and that's how I worked on film, so I carry that with me. I don't work with images, but I work with sound in the same way, and it's simplistic, but it's something I can understand, and I'm happy to work like that. I worked in music as well, which is the same thing, and that's why it's appropriate, I think, that some of these pieces go into not just galleries, and in fact least of all galleries, but sort of concert halls and venues, theatres and cinemas, to listen. There's a couple of really great movements. There's one in Denmark where Jana and I were in December, where they have radio cinema, I think it's called, where once a month they put sound into the cinematic theatre and don't have an image, and so because it's created comfortable seats and a surround sound environment.
So it's like public radio.
Yeah, and then also coincidentally, a bit like we were saying the other day, at the same time there's a spot in London called In the Dark, where people do exactly the same thing. They go to a cinema space once a month and listen to sound, and there are introductions and talks, but that's what I find really encouraging, and may well overcome some of this reticence about going into galleries and having art played at you or art presented in front of you. A much better approach, and satisfying, I think.
I love the fact how here life, as we experience the dying of the coral reef, the depletion of the oceans, and your work kind of touch. It's kind of interest for me, because if I do a documentary, I have to not just deal with one issue, but everything else that surrounds it.
Yeah.
And we were all kind of horrified by what we've seen on the fishing boats, the miserable lives that these poor people have, and the desperation to take the last few bits out of the water.
Yeah.
Now, how is that going to influence what you're doing?
It won't, because I see that, unfortunately, most of the places I go, I've travelled a lot in the 30 years, and I see the abject misery which most of the people on this planet live in. We're incredibly privileged and have these luxury lifestyles. Anywhere in the so-called developed world, most people live in complete fucking misery, and it horrifies me. I've seen children in Ethiopia blinded by sandstorms, at the age of sort of 12 or 14, with their eyes sort of raw, for the lack of a very simple treatment which would have saved their eyesight. I've got 3 kids. I used to find it really hard going back home and dealing with those situations. So I've become, sadly in that sense, immune to that. I cannot, when I'm here recording Humpback Whales, represent those people's lives or their conditions in a way that wouldn't trivialise it, or in any way change it. There's an interesting, I'm not saying there's a role for that in filmmaking. There's no way in the piece that I'm doing can do that. The only larger scale thing that I would draw people's attention to in the work, or not so much in the work, but the things associated that I'd like to see when it's presented, are things like noise pollution and the pollution of the oceans, or having said that it's the largest habitat on the planet. I cannot do anything about the plight of those people on the coral
No, I
reef.
was well, that's a separate issue. I'm talking about the depletion of the ocean. You're recording the coral reefs and the whales, and they are the ocean is empty and the reef is dying. So clearly, if you make a statement with the sound of the ocean, or is it just the quality of the sound recording that says it?
No, because there's a problem there in that the population of humpback whales is increasing in this place. The humpback whale population is increasing because they don't eat here. They come here to pair up and reproduce. I mean, effectively, I'm not passing the question, but that Jana's work reflects what's happening on the coral reef. The sea in general here is a satisfactory place for humpback whales. Otherwise, we wouldn't see an increasing population. So that won't affect what's happening to the coral reefs. Won't affect my work in this piece, and that's one of the differences between Jana says specifically to look and listen to that, and I'm sure that will be reflected in her work. But not mine. Will you liberate them?
Yeah. But I think people like that.
And it goes back to this like long form listening as well, which I'm getting much more interested in. I was thinking the other day what I should do is not a 40-minute piece, but a 24-hour piece.
That would be good.
But
it has been done before.
Oh, yeah,
12-hour. Andy Warhol.
Sleep.
Can be done.
I went to I did a piece in San Francisco at Asphodel Studios. It was called the Recombinant Media Laboratory. When no human had it, we had 10 screen surround cinema. But for the pieces I did, they took the cinemas away and just had this huge L-acoustic surround system. And they asked me to do something that was several hours long. They're Californians.
Yeah, you did that?
I did. I was a bit. I had to make something else when I was there.
Okay. We did a freak out installation. We were 13 artists in the Moderna Museet in Stockholm recently, which was open for 48 hours. It's like 4 big halls of sound, and people were hanging around. One guy was just coming out. He spent 2 nights, or 1 night. Woke up, 1 night working. And he said, wow, I think I'm overdosed. But he actually stayed there the whole time it was open, just hanging around and lying around. People really enjoyed it. They relaxed and sort of hung around on the floor.
Oh, there's a cultural shift in some places of that.
Well, with unemployment being so big, 2 days is for some people.
Yeah.
But also, seriously, it's a relief, because everybody, puts the fucking earbuds in and listens for 90 seconds, or they change the channel at home every 2 minutes,
Yeah.
Because people are so wound up. Giving them the opportunity, providing you comfortable, and I keep going back to the presentations properly, people will do it. They'll sit there, they'll lie there, go to sleep if they like, wake up, and or engage with it in a different way. And because of that, it can be really satisfying. We know that because that's what people ask us to do now increasingly. So that's interesting, the feedback we get. It's still marginal audiences compared to mainstream, but nevertheless, people will do it, they'll go with it.
Well, that doesn't really matter. That's the secondary issue anyway, whether they will go there. But the ones that go there need to be affected deeply so that your efforts have been worthwhile.
Yeah. Generally, I have to say, they are, by the feedback we get. There's a good momentum for it at the moment.
It's very interesting that the daughter of the biggest collectors of traditional art paintings is the supporter of this enterprise. It's kind of a contradiction.
Yeah.
Or questioning that is, approach to art.
Yeah. Well, we both came through that through the Morning Line, which I still think is the best piece of public art I've ever experienced, and because I saw people who came to it, whether it was in Seville or Istanbul or Vienna, it worked in a very powerful way, and was a good prelude to these pieces. Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So Jana, the dying reef and your work.
Yeah.
How does it affect your work?
Well, first of all, the reef are already died. They are already dead since the 80s here. It died of the white band disease, because this reef are so. It wasn't extremely diverse in terms of species. So when this white band disease came in, it wiped out whole huge areas of reefs here, and we're just seeing little bits that are alive, so very few percent, though it varies in this whole area. And of course then the fishing has a great influence on that, because on the possibility of growing back for the coral is totally, depending on that there are parrotfish that comes and come and eat the algae that lives on the coral.
Yeah.
On the dead coral. For the new coral to have somewhere to settle, you need the parrotfish to clean it, and the parrotfish is fished up by the legal fishing that goes on here. So I mean, for me, this whole cycle of different things that are influencing each other in this environment here is essential for the work that I do. So maybe some difference from how Chris's approach is for this particular place.
So the musical composition or symphonic composition that you're going to end up with will can reflect what you are experiencing.
Yeah, but I don't see it as ending up necessarily in something. It will end. It is already had several different expressions as being installation. I have had several talks about the findings have done already in Belize, and will do about here, which is a more, in my mind, a more documentary way of telling a story. Though in the piece I would rather tell a story that are more in a sound piece which has a beginning and an end. I would tell a story that are more what do you call it, fictional, that has fictional elements.
But there's the middle.
Hmm?
For fiction you need a middle too, not just a beginning and an end.
No, yeah. No, I mean that has a development.
Right.
That has a dramaturgic development.
I'm just joking.
If you're thinking about some kind of, a release, for example, it has a beginning and an end.
But in modern art, who was it? Godard said every good movie has to have a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
Except not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, But I'm not, in this work particularly, I'm not looking towards a final large piece. I see the pieces that I'm doing along these 3 years residency as, ongoing with several outcomes. And communication with people along the, even just like, a week ago we met, I don't know how many, 100 people at this symposium, which is already an audience, and then you might have a concert for 500 people, in a couple of weeks. This is how it kind of evolves.
Do you care about their response? Or you just want them to come and then create their own opinion about what you're doing?
I'm most of all hoping that I can inspire somebody to be engaged in the subjects that I'm occupied with, and if I can give them the idea that it actually is sound underwater, that there is an extra sense to understand or to ask questions about, and we know so little about what's happening under the surface, and it's so much treated as out of sight, out of mind. And I have seen that when I have played, for example, recordings from Greenland of the melting of the ice, quite some years ago now, but saw the reaction of people that because sound is so kind of comes very close to you and it's all around you, and it can be very emotional. Instead of looking at the picture at the distance of a melting iceberg, actually to hear it like all around you, it has a closer effect. I feel effect. I'm not looking for effect. It's more like that it would touch people and inspire people, hopefully.
But were you thinking about maybe combining images, because they're all very visual subjects you have chosen?
Yeah.
The melting of the icebergs, if it would be accompanied by also the falling pieces of ice, or you would prefer not to combine the visual?
I like to both. Like Chris was saying, also we work a lot in a more kind of in concert situations. I have stopped standing in front of the audience though with two speakers and pouring the sound at the audience. I like to be standing in the middle with the audience and having the sound all around me and the audience, so we hear the same thing and I play live.
But if somebody would project the visual equivalent?
Well, first of all, people would have a direction. They would look. They couldn't just close their eyes and fall asleep or lie down on the floor or do whatever they like if they had to sit in one direction looking at something. Another thing is that I do often myself, and even already when I record, I close my eyes to be able to hear properly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you feel that yourself. Everybody feels that when you close the light down and you listen to whatever it is you listen to, you hear much clearer with less light and less information, like visual information that you have to process, and then you have more space for listening for the details, and
it's
get submerged in the sound, so to say.
No, that's good. It's interesting how you think a piece of art of 200 years ago needs a musical inspiration to keep your attention, like what you did in front of the paintings. Yet the melting iceberg can be more effectively brought to an audience just by the sound.
It's different. That's what I like about sound. It has this incredibly flexible. So it will work in the National Gallery with people looking at a painting and perhaps engaging with it in another way. And a lot of the times, it's the picture becomes irrelevant.